Mira que ya viene la revolución, para que se asustan será para mejor. Es el pueblo entero el que ya está gritando, ¡viva la revolución!
Iranian nuclear weapons development.
They have turned the island into a communist hellhole.
The experiment in Venezuela has failed completely.
La bestialidad imperialista. Bestialidad que no tiene una frontera determinada ni pertenece a un país determinado. Bestias fueron las hordas hitleristas, como bestias son los norteamericanos hoy, como bestias son los paracaidistas belgas, como bestias fueron los imperialistas franceses en Argelia. Porque es la naturaleza del imperialismo la que bestializa a los hombres, la que la convierte en fieras sedientas de sangre que están dispuestas a degollar, a asesinar, a destruir hasta la última imagen de un revolucionario, de un partidario de un régimen que haya caído bajo su bota o que luche por su libertad. Y la estatua que recuerda a Lumumba, hoy destruida pero mañana reconstruida, nos recuerda también en la historia trágica de ese mártir de la revolución del mundo, que no se puede confiar en el imperialismo, pero ni tantito, nada.
Aquí pensaban seguir ganando el 100% con casas de apartamentos y echar al pueblo a sufrir y seguir de modo cruel contra el pueblo conspirando para seguirlo explotando, y en eso llegó Fidel. Y se acabó la diversión, llegó el comandante y mandó a parar. Y se acabó la diversión, llegó el comandante y mandó a parar. Aquí pensaban seguir, tragando y tragando tierra, sin sospechar que en la sierra se alumbraba el porvenir. Y seguir de modo cruel la costumbre del delito, hacer de Cuba un garito, y en eso llegó Fidel. Y se acabó la diversión, llegó el comandante y mandó a parar. Y se acabó la diversión, llegó el comandante y mandó a parar.
Yo, what's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 42, Unmasking Imperialism, Exposing Imperialist Propaganda in Mainstream Media. Today, elections in Venezuela and Cuba solidarity. We mark the 5th anniversary of the passing of Comandante Fidel Castro of Cuba, who passed away on November 25th, 2016. Fidel Castro presente. We also celebrate the birthday of Presidente Nicolás Maduro of Venezuela, who turned 59 years old on November 23rd. I'm honored to share a birthday with Nicolás Maduro. I turned 30, so I'm getting old as hell. Maduro is 59, and we also honor Presidente Nicolás Maduro. Chávez vive, Maduro sigue, viva Fidel. And today we are exposing mainstream media coverage of elections in Venezuela and the failed attempted coup in Cuba, the attempted color revolution, the protest that flopped, that failed, that garnered no support from the Cuban people. And we're gonna focus on talking about the outcome of the regional elections in Venezuela, where the PSUV the United Socialist Party of Venezuela won 20 out of 23 gubernatorial seats, a landslide victory for socialism, for Chavismo in Venezuela, and also how people in the diaspora, how people in Cuba resisted the November 15th State Department color revolution attempt. And joining me today are some of my good homies, my comrades, Yhamir Chabur. Yhamir is a Colombian activist based in New York City. Shout out to New York, my hometown. I'm out here in Cali. New York City is my hometown. And Yhamir is the host of the Bolivarian Flame. Please subscribe to the Bolivarian Flame. The link to his channel is in the description. He has some really great videos on the front lines of the socialist Latin American internationalist movement protesting in New York. So please make sure to check out his channel. And recently, Yhamir has been active in Cuba solidarity campaigns in New York City, especially cleaning up the murals of Ernesto Che Guevara and Juan Pedro Albizu Campos in Spanish Harlem that the right-wing Cuban gusanos have been destroying and trying to defame. How's it going, compañero Yhamir?
It's going good. I feel happy. I feel motivated. I was just checking if my mic was on. But yeah, I'm just looking forward to the show, talking about Cuba solidarity work that I've been a part of in New York City, and as well as just sharing the space with my other two comrades, Khalil and Comrade Libre in Miami. So yeah,
most definitely, and of course, Comrade Libre, who's Afro-Boricua poet based in Miami, who's with the Troika Kollective. Troika Kollective is led by Latin American and Caribbean people combating imperialist propaganda in the metropole. Please make sure to check out Troika Kollective. Link is in the description. Make sure to show them some love on social media. How's it going, Comrade Libre?
From our end, we're just here doing the work of the working class people and using science as the basis for our revolution in what people call the belly of the beast. So super excited to be on this call with comrades. We always repping Free Palestine.
That's what's up, Kafia gang. Everybody got the Kafias except for me. And last but not least, my compañero Khalil, Nika, also with Troika Kollective, revolutionary, had a great workshop a few days ago about the hybrid war against Nicaragua, and shared a lot of interesting knowledge combining Marxism, Leninism, and lessons from the Soviet Union and China, applying it to Nicaragua, applying it to the 21st century. Comrade Khalil, how's it going, brother?
Word. I'm doing fine. I'm happy to be in space with y'all brothers and others. Always a pleasure to be in discussion with you. Yesterday was Indigenous Peoples Day of Mourning. And, us whose ancestors come from south of the Rio Grande, of the Americas, of Abya, we mourn a little different. Sometimes we eat a lot when we mourn. So I had to do that family turkey. Everybody said it came out fast. So I'm very happy about that. But, I would like to also point out that on November 23rd was the passing of Malika Shabazz, the daughter of El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, more commonly known as Malcolm X, one of our greatest national heroes. Thank you, brother.
Most definitely. Rest in peace, Comrade Malika Shabazz. Malcolm X, for me, is one of my favorite revolutionaries. Shout out to everybody who's watching, listening, by the way, to Gustavo Suarez, que viva las FARC EP, que viva las FARC, que viva LN, and all revolutionaries in Colombia and Nuestra America. Ewok said, looking forward to the discussion. ILL said, hello, comrades. Beautiful poster of Malcolm X that Comrade Libre is holding up for those of you who are listening. And so also shout out to compañera Deborah Rodriguez. Saludos, Ramiro y mi gente. I'm glad to have this discussion with y'all because, we have these two major events that took place. The November 15th flopped attempted color revolution, the US-backed protest. They told us weeks in advance. They're like, November 15th, there's going to be this huge uprising in Cuba. And they planned it. It was a complete flop. We're going to talk about that in the second half of the hour. We're going to start off with talking about the electoral victory of socialism, of Chavismo in Venezuela, where the PSUV won 20 out of 23 gubernatorial offices across the country. I want to play a clip of Juan Guaido responding to the election victory and then just get your initial reactions to the election.
Do anything for clout. They do anything for clout. Do anything for clout. They do anything for clout.
That's it. That's how I wanted to play. Juan Guaido has nothing to say of value. So I just wanted to, that was kind of one of the funniest moments that came out of the whole thing, is he had this fake presidential sign in the background. And it was just so symbolic when that whole symbol, his whole set came down. And it was just pathetic and sad to see so many of the right-wing Venezolanos, the Gusanos, were talking smack about, even mainstream media. They were saying that it wasn't a free and fair election. And they were saying that it's the same headline they've been using for years and years. Maduro tightens his grip. Maduro has a fake election. Nobody recognizes it. Yet even the opposition, it has to be noted, participated in the election. And the opposition in Venezuela is very weak. Nobody wants them because socialism, constructive socialism of the 21st century, has proved to be more efficient than neoliberalism. The people of Venezuela do not want to return to the 80s and the 90s when all of their oil, the biggest oil reserve on the planet, was at the service of the big military industrial complex, of the oil industrial complex. So why don't we start off with compañero Yhamir? Maybe just give us your initial reaction to, I know you've been following the Venezuela election. You've been to Venezuela several times. Why don't you just give us your initial overview of what you think about this election victory?
No, I think it's basically another victory for Chavismo out of the 22 years of elections that they've had since the ascendancy of El Comandante Chavez to the presidency in 1999. And I think this is just another victory for the people of Venezuela, and a big smack in the face of imperialism. As you know, we're seeing the United States has tried to intervene different ways. I remember Maduro speaking about this, like I think a week before the elections, about, with the Nicaraguan elections, they failed. Like the people of Nicaragua elected their leader, El Comandante Daniel Ortega. In Bolivia, there was an assassination attempt against the President Arce that failed. In Cuba, we're about to get into that, the 15th of November, with the so-called color revolution protest, that failed. And right now with Venezuela, these elections, they failed as well. So Maduro talked about, throughout our whole Latin America, imperialism gets jealous because they wish they had a Bolivar, they wish they had a Martí, a Sandino, a Tupac Katari, a Evo Morales, a Hugo Chavez, to defend their people, a Fidel Castro, rest in peace. It's another victory.
Most definitely. And it just shows that this so-called, something like Khalil said on the workshop the other day really was powerful to me, where people will call it the pink tide. And I've made that mistake myself, or I'll call it the pink tide. But anything that's moving towards socialism, toward communism in Latin America is red, is revolutionary. And a lot of times in the first world or in the US, people like to sort of quarterback from the bench, so to speak, or critique when they're not building revolution and be like, oh, they're not radical enough. So many people on the quote unquote left in the US that say Venezuela is not socialist enough for them or not revolutionary enough. And this is just an example of like why it's important to show solidarity and be open-minded about how the peoples of each nation build and determine their own revolution. They have that right to do that. And I think Venezuela is doing a great job. The Venezuelan economy, by the way, is doing much better than it has been in many years. The GDP has been growing. They're talking about already using a currency to build more infrastructure, more housing. So many advancements have been made, and the PSUV has been shown to be the party of peace and stability despite all of these sanctions and the blockade. Comrade Libre, your analysis of the recent electoral victory in Venezuela.
First of all, I just want to show this, right? I think international solidarity is really important, right? So this is Fidel Castro and Thomas Sankara. They lit. My analysis, first of all, like when I saw this video of Juan Guaido, I just started laughing because this is literally like what imperialism is, right? It's weak, right? And so when you're a child and you don't get your way, you're gonna try to bully right? And so this is what the U.S. does, and so the elections, despite sanctions, despite imperialism, is wonderful, right? I did an interview with Comrade Danny, and we talked with people that were going to observe the elections, right? And they explained the whole process, right? They explained the fact that even the opposition parties participated, like you were sharing. And I think that these things are really important because we have to combat the propaganda that's forced down our throats here in the U.S. Because a lot of people speak without ever bringing any facts to the table when they're talking about dictatorships or people being oppressed, right? And so I think we have a job as revolutionaries, not only to be like scientific socialists, right, and understand that it's a science, but also to push back the narrative that even people on the left in the U.S. In Turtle Island are saying, so that we can push them closer to having a principled analysis, right, and understanding that our job as revolutionaries is to support the sovereignty of other countries and not tell them how they should be doing things, right? Our job here is to overthrow empire here. That's our responsibility to our comrades abroad.
Yeah, most definitely. And it always enrages me when people would talk shit. They would like, oh, okay, Venezuela's not going through the exact same process as the Soviet Union or China, so therefore they're revisionist or this or that. And a lot of those kind of ultra critiques or arguments I would always get really upset about, because if you go to, I haven't been to Venezuela, but compañero Yhamir has been there. I could imagine how beautiful it is to be able to see the oppressed working class people, black, brown, colonized people building socialism with Venezuelan characteristics adapted to their condition. And it's something that I think is the best thing for people to leave the US, leave Turtle Island, and go to the nations that are building socialism and see for yourself. And compañero Khalil, your reaction to the socialist victory in Venezuela?
So I think if we look at Venezuela, we're looking at a revolution succeeding in a state of crisis. And what do I mean by crisis? When we were in Nicaragua in our most recent brigade at the YALA, Instituto Agricultura Latina America, the agriculture institutes, which were created by Chavez for the massification process of peasant workers, of campesinos. One of the lead teachers, his name is Carlos Rodriguez, right? He said, you see development in Venezuela and Nicaragua, even though they try to break it down. And he was like, wait, not even though they try to break it down, it's despite we're developing in our own way. We develop based on the trials and tribulations that happen in our real society. And I think that's the best way to understand these elections, right? I think we have to understand that elections in the Venezuelan revolution are super important. It is the trenches, right? We all know that Hugo Chavez had a failed coup attempt in 1992. And through that process, he was able to learn the mass line and through process of massification, in which he would lead to the formation of the Bolivarian Republic and the Bolivarian Revolution. And Nicaragua itself had its second revolution based on that. Evo Morales and the Party of Mas had their first revolution. I think these municipal victories are very important. I think we have to understand the implications of what it means regionally, in the sense of Venezuela, but also in the sense of the greater Latin American landscape, because one of the towns in which they lost, which is like out of two out of how many districts, one of them is a border town with Colombia, right? A border town with Colombia, meaning that, just as the U.S. has hybrid wars on Colombia, those things will be used in an attempt to spill into Venezuela and cause disarray on the Venezuelan people's self-determination and development towards the solidification of socialism as a Venezuelan kind of socialism.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, especially because it's important to remember as well that the people of Venezuela have been undergoing so much destabilization externally, right? Because you have on the one hand south to Venezuela, you have Brazil, which is run by Bolsonaro, evangelical right-wing Zionist puppet backed by the U.S. You have to the west Colombia, which has been the training ground for a lot of paramilitary groups. I think Gustavo had a great comment in the chat. He said, Yasser Klein of the IDF is responsible for training the AUCs, the autodefensas that perpetrated massive genocide of Colombian indigenous and communist Colombians. Most definitely. And you have literally the training grounds of these paramilitary forces that are terrorizing not only people in Colombia, but making excursions into Venezuela as well. We know that several occasions paramilitaries have gone into Venezuela and murdered innocent people, Chavistas. And it's also important to mention as well that to the east in Guyana, you have ExxonMobil trying to appropriate and grab the land of Essequibo, which belongs to Venezuela, where it's one of the biggest oil reserves. And ExxonMobil is creating a divide and conquer strategy to try to create tensions where they don't exist. So what I want to do is I want to share a clip from, there's this really shitty podcast. I was looking up Venezuela election results. And what I noticed is that in a lot of mainstream media, like they were really hyping it up earlier on. They were like, oh my God, like the dictator, this and that. And then after the election, because it was so obvious that the Chavistas are the popular force, the mainstream media, they kind of played the same thing with Cuba. After November 15th, the stories about Cuba kind of died down because it was a complete flop. So I want to play this clip from a podcast from the north. It's a really crappy podcast from some fucking Vende Patria, Escuálidos. I think they're based in Miami, actually. One of them is based in Miami. The title is called Chavismo Wins Fake Elections in Venezuela. So I want to play this and get you guys' reaction.
We'll be talking about fake elections in Venezuela.
Yay.
There's a lot to unpack, but basically Edu and I are in a laughing out of sadness and despair mood because this is the cycle that we have seen over and over again since both of us and our generation has a conscious mind.
Yeah, we can't afford to be sad about these things. Like at this point, we just laugh ironically and trying to move on. But yeah, it's just the never-ending cycle of the government doing their own thing and the opposition just falling for every single trap possible.
It's always, I think the cycle is, stalemate, protest, negotiations end up in elections.
Nothing
happens. Elections don't do anything. Nothing happens. Then they try to make protests happen again. But I don't know that the people are going to follow them much longer since nearly 60% of Venezuelans decided not to vote. And we'll talk in depth about that a little bit later. But let's start unpacking the fake elections. If you guys watch this show, you should by now be pretty in tune with how 21st century dictators stay in power by going through unfree and unjust elections. We just saw it in Nicaragua in one of the most extreme cases. So of course, the first thing that these regimes use is first world idiots to come into the country and say, look how amazing and free these elections are and in this socialist utopia. Thank you, Chavez. So, of course, here we're going to see DSA Portland, the whitest people you could find in America are once again visiting a dictatorship to then come back to the U.S. and say, I was there. I was an election. What is it they call themselves?
Witness.
A witness.
Or a protector. What? I don't know. Whatever.
They monitor elections.
Yeah. This stuff is insane. The DSA just keeps getting worse and worse. And of course, we're not going to hear anything from the usual suspects, members of the DSA, other than silence. At best. At worst, we may be hearing from them congratulating Maduro as well. Some other politicians around the world have done, including Vladimir Putin, Evo Morales, etc., etc., etc.
The authoritarian bloc. If you thought the Cold War was over,
oh boy,
sorry.
Oh boy, do I have news for you.
They committed a little mistake, Edu, because the Cuban puppet dictator, Díaz-Canel, sent his congratulations for an overwhelming victory for Maduro and the Chavista regime, and now we're before the official results were out.
Not that it matters, not that we're surprised. Again, like, it's something that we discussed last week when we were talking about the article from The Atlantic. Which again, it's I don't want to make the whole thing about this article, but in reality, it's pretty good. It's great.
That is what the show is about as well. I mean,
it's what the show is about, and referring to that article, and again, please read it if you haven't read it yet. It's the Maduro model of dictatorship, which is not about keeping the forms, which is not about proving to the international community one way or another that you're doing good, that you're democratic. They don't care about that. They couldn't give a flying shit about it. And even then, you still have the DSA guys going to Venezuela to make a propaganda move. Even then, you still have some members of the opposition that decided to be a part of this circus. I don't know. It's just Maduro and the Chavismo in general. They have, but we've been saying this is a cycle. This is not the first time that they've done it. They've been doing this over and over and over and over ever since before Maduro, like with Chavez, back when we still had some kind of actual democratic institutions left. And now that we don't have any, now that the country is like, you can consider Venezuela a failed state. We're still going back to this. Like, the opposition just keeps going back to this. And, I don't know, man. I don't know how long we can keep this going.
Váyanse al carajo 100 veces!
I added that little last part at the end just to give some release, because these fucking idiots were just going on babbling about the quote-unquote the fake elections. By the way, their podcast is called From the North. So that just gives you a sense of where they're coming. They're literally coming from the perspective of Northern imperialists. Before I pass it over to you, comrades, to just give your analysis of that, one thing I found that was really interesting is that they make fun of the fact that there are international election observers and monitors, even though that's what they've been claiming for years, that the elections in Venezuela don't have, right? For so many years, they're like, oh, there's no independent international observers. There's no people outside of the country analyzing this. Well, there's plenty of them. There's literally hundreds of them. And now they want to talk crap. So they're never going to be happy no matter what. The other thing that Comrade Flame of Liberation said, these rich expats love to use ID poll to push their anti-socialism. I found that really interesting because they themselves are white. They themselves are white Venezuelans who are are using this to try to seem like, oh, just because there's white people in solidarity with the Bolivarian Revolution, that it's somehow bad, which, it's complete craziness. And then also the fact that there's this constant myth about the democratic Venezuela before Chavismo, that if you really look into the history of Venezuela before 1999, the country was basically a giant plantation for the big oil companies. It was mainly white criollos who dominated the whole entire political landscape, and the majority of Afro-Indigenous peoples were completely marginalized. So just completely ahistorical, no historical context. But compañero Yhamir, your analysis and reaction to From the North.
Yeah, it was very historical. It was very funny. Just hearing these Escualidos come out and try to like cancel out these elections, the legitimacy of these elections, and also as well as the participation of the opposition. Like they're kind of, for me, the way I took it was like they're trying to, through this like liberal, I guess, lens, or I don't know, try to like push for military intervention, like try to like sway people to be like, there's no point for the opposition to participate, that, we need to get rid of Chavismo, and I just feel like this is just like the opening for trying to promote military intervention. And yeah, I mean, it made me laugh about certain pictures that they posted up. Like, they goes to show that they do follow our media. And
Yeah.
I remember there was a poster there. There was a picture there of Vijay Prashad and Manolo de los Santos with Maduro, and I remember I was there for that delegation. That was for el Congreso Bicentenario de los Pueblos back in June. So it surprised me about how they're following us, and it goes to show how now they're gonna take certain people out of context. Or it was funny how they use whiteness too, and them being white Venezuelans themselves. But I mean, yeah, I mean overall, these are like basically the children of the rich kids, of the rich people, that they lost their wealth, they lost their political power in Venezuela. And they, are just trying to talk about this fantasy of what Venezuela was in the 80s and the 90s, which basically was a client state to the United States. And basically, they had economic crisis in the 90s and massacres and disappearances, and nothing was being said. But yeah, that's just that's what I think about this video.
Yeah, most definitely. It's something that what they do is they completely focus in on 1999 to the present. They remove any historical anecdotes or facts about what Venezuela was like that had one of the highest inequality rates by Gini coefficient in the world. Look at the statistics, the raw math. The inequality in Venezuela under neoliberalism was so bad that you had the wealthiest, filthy, filthy rich white criollo settlers who were in Venezuela, who dominated, monopolized the oil industry, and were basically just selling that oil to these huge multinational companies very cheaply. The majority of the people were impoverished, had no political and economic power in the country. Comrade Libre, your reaction?
I'm just disturbed that like these people get followings, right? That they have an audience to entertain around this. It's honestly just sickening because, like if you're willing to like sell your own country out and you have like no commitment to your people and your land, it's just a really sad thing. And they used like apparently an article or whatever, but I didn't hear any mention of like of the results, right? Like what research are they doing? Do they not know that you can congratulate a leader because you update votes almost like hour by hour? They probably don't even know the electoral process that happens, or the lack thereof that happens here in Turtle Island, right? And I also think, and we were talking about this point when we were interviewing comrades in Venezuela, right? This, like, why do we not have international observers come observe the U.S. elections, right? Why do we not have international observers here? Because we know for a fact that there is fraud, right? That that the process that is taking place is not one that that even remotely resembles democracy, right? It gives the impression, it gives the facade, right, that we in this country have freedom and liberty and we can speak our mind, right? Well, then why do we have political prisoners and prisoners of war, right? Why, if you happen to be a communist, right, you can't say shit, but if you're a Proud Boy, then let me give you a platform, right? And so this idea that for some odd reason here in this country, right, in Turtle Island, that we are somehow absolved from corruption, right? That this is where people come to be free. No, this is where people come because their land's being exploited by the U.S. Let's be honest. Quality of life is way better in other countries. Most people only come here because they need jobs. Because during the Cold War, which they mentioned, but I'm sure they're not very aware of, right? You have attacks on our people, massacres happening. That's why people are coming to Turtle Island, right? And when they get here, like the illusion is lifted. The streets are not made of gold, right? And you have to work. You have to work to live, not live to work, right? And so the exploitation is just ridiculous. So it's just stupid, and they should do a lot better job of understanding like how these things work. In Nicaragua, homie won 75% of the vote, which is up from the last elections where I believe he had 69% of the vote. Why? Because he's actually doing things, right? He's como se dice en Nicaragua, el pueblo es presidente, right? Like the people are in power. Like there's this figurehead that is helping to ensure that what the peasants, what the people are asking for is being done, right? So like these leaders are doing that work, that needed work.
Most definitely. And it's interesting because even those shitty Esqualido podcasters, they're just repeating, like the guy, he was like, oh, it's like that article in the Atlantic. I'm like, you mean the mainstream media article that's funded by fucking Raytheon and all these mega corporations that make money from more? Like the critical thinking is just insane to me, because anyone who in any way cites like Telesur or Venezuela, anything that's in any way pro-socialist, or at least has some favorable coverage of Venezuela, they're like, oh, they're brainwashed or propaganda. But when you literally are citing the Atlantic and all these mainstream media publications, they're like, oh no, they're respectable. They're respectable journalists. They are objective. They don't have anything that's biased about them. So it's just really interesting to see that their mental gymnastics that they use. Shout out to Steve Richter, said peace, lamb, bread. With the Palestine flag today. I'm the only odd person out. I don't have a keffiyeh, but the comrades have a keffiyeh. I need to get one. I'm gonna try to convince Ophelia to get me one. Shout out to Jay, said, and most DSA folks that went to Venezuela are brown working class. Flame of Liberation said, I just looked them up. Even though they are shilling for global capitalism and CIA, they can't even hardly reach 100 views. Yo, for real, because it's like, who the fuck wants war, right? Like that message is no longer even popular as it once was, of like, SOS Venezuela, we need to go in and bomb the crap out of the country and establish democracy. I think that spell is really beginning to dissipate. Jay also said there's also like 8% participation in Miami's elections just last month. The hypocrisy. That's very great point. We have to do at some point a whole episode about the mythology of Miami. It's something I've been thinking about, because I feel like Miami has been hoisted up as this image of like free market, paradise, capitalism, tropical capitalism, and they don't even know how much poverty and oppression there is in Miami in itself. So that's like a whole nother thing that we'll have to do. And Bird Roldes said, I'm glad I haven't heard from Joanna Zionist Gusano Houseman in quite a while. Yeah, she's fucking annoying as fuck. And Comrade Khalil, your reaction to these idiots from the north talking about Venezuela?
So, I'm from Miami, right? And Miami, we have a lot of oppositions. There's a lot of workers here, right? To break that myth, Miami is truly a tale of two cities. You have a working class city, and you have a city of luxury. You have Black Miami, and then you have a city of Jim Crow rulers and Latin American exiles, self-exiled, right? Former rulers of Latin America. So with that being said, I think this video is hilarious. First and foremost, it is hilarious. And I don't find it that disturbing, because this is like very common to interact with in my life, I would say. And I don't even interact with that many like Latinos like this. It just always ends up being like that. So I would say, like, I would like to point out a few things. I would say identity politics is inherently, like, in my opinion, a bourgeois ideology, right? Whether it's being used by the Latin American exile calling for intervention in their country, whether it's used by Republicans for patriotism, or it's used by liberals, progressives, and I would say counter-revolutionaries on the left in regards to Black, brown, indigeneity. It's reliant on like subjectivism, right? And I'm going to use the word subjectivism because my next point is Walter Rodney's 2 worldviews on the Russian Revolution. It's part of his anthology, which was released just recently, like 2, maybe 3 years ago by Verso. And in it, he says like, yo, the bourgeois scholar, right? And these people are no scholars, right? But I would like to say, like, in the society of the spectacle, as Guy Debord says, right? In the society of spectacle, everybody becomes a movie star at least once, right? Even Even me, I'm standing next to Ramiro and his luscious hair. Look at that. That guy's definitely a movie star.
Thank you. Thank you.
So it's my time. It's my time in this spectacle today. But you know, the bourgeoisie likes to base its arguments on being impartial. You see the guy like, oh, it's always happens. I don't even have emotions about it. I just don't know, you know. But he does know. He knows what his position is, but he's trying to seem neutral, right? That's what these murderers do. They seem neutral. They're like, yeah, we're gonna bomb Africa, but we feel bad about it. I remember I went to go listen to the Shock Doctrine. The guy, he wrote a book called The Shock Doctrine. He was like Obama's economic administrator. He's like, yo, Obama felt so bad that he couldn't help the workers keep their houses. You know, he made a tough decision, like bail out the banks or like help the houses or help people keep their houses. And, you know, he made a decision for the economy and it was tough, bro. He felt so bad that people lost their houses. Like, bro, you actually had the power to prevent that. You actually had the power to ensure that people who labored for their homes could keep their homes. But instead, you decided to bail out the banks, which has been a common trend in the last, I would say, 15 years of fucking global crises or economic crises to the U.S. economy. Just look at the beginning of COVID. The banks and Wall Street got bailed out first. Not only did they get bailed out first, they got bailed out more than once. Right? This is the only way that they're ensuring that there isn't a crash in economy. And to Comrade J points, which I'm like 90% sure is my cousin here in Miami, who does hella good work. Two things. The Internationalist Committee, the brother that was seen is Comrade Austin. And he's been pushing to ensure that the DSA commits to actual social strategy. Right? And he went to Venezuela to participate in these elections and witness it, right? And to ensure, right, the fact that Western media cannot lie to those who are trying to organize an imperial core, at least DSA's organization. We could critique DSA all we want, but this is what I know of it. And I would critique DSA as well. But also to provide aid to combating these corporate-owned media, right? Like, yo, the more we share information, the stronger we're able to create content for the future. And it's hard work because we don't have billions of dollars to support our financial campaigns. This is blood, sweat, and tears for the betterment of mankind, of humankind, of womankind, of non-gendered kind. And then my last point is here, this is a municipal election, right? So they're saying, oh, Comrade Maduro, this is a municipal election. They're not even talking about the fact that this is for mayors. This is for like city councils or however their structure is, because I won't pretend to know. But whatever that is, whatever it is, they're not even mentioning that. They're just mentioning the name Maduro as a little trigger, right? The lack of intention really shows the lack of investment in Venezuela, right? Here in Miami, right? We here at Troika have been talking, discussing, and something we seem to agree on is like, look, maybe not everybody here in Miami who will stand against these sanctions and blockades needs to be socialists, but they do need to understand that sanctions and blockades are economic warfare, right? And if you did a little bit of studying, you would understand that. And I think it's very important to have the diaspora. I think something like the Venezuelan diaspora, especially because the Venezuelan diaspora, like the Nicaraguan diaspora, is not a committed enemy to the revolution, like the Cuban diaspora largely is, especially here in Miami. They are split. When we had our hands-off Venezuelan protests, when Guaido tried to do a coup d'etat like 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, maybe 3, COVID really fucks up my sense of time. I apologize. But when we're in Doral, City, Miami, Doral, you would not believe the support we got from the Venezuelan diaspora. Like, yes, do not intervene in Venezuela. Yes, do not intervene in Venezuela. And you would get some screams and you get some chants. And I'm talking about all kinds of Venezuelans. I'm talking about the white Venezuelans you would think were squalidos. I'm talking about brown Venezuelans who obviously look like they're of indigenous descent, or the Afro Venezuelans who obviously look like they're African descent. The results were mixed, because we have to remember that the revolution is a class theme. It is the majority against the minority. It is the workers and peasants of the world united against the monopoly capitalists, the oligarchs, and the exploiters of labor.
Wow, well said. That's really important information to know, because for me, I've stayed away from Miami for many years, because in my mind, I've been to Miami several times. I have family in Miami, and I've always had bad encounters. Like, I was reading a Fidel Castro book one time, and I was walking in Little Havana. I was like, I don't know what the fuck I was thinking, but people were like giving me some dirty ass looks, and just the interactions I had. So we get like that one image of Miami as like, it's all just pure right-wing exile, gusano contras, which certainly exists. But I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think there are broad sectors of people who, whatever, maybe they're not socialists, maybe they're not even like against capitalism. But if you explain, like you said, Khalil, that sanctions are an act of economic warfare, that innocent people are dying, I think that's a good way to approach it. I think that's the correct way for leftists as well, to not be so dogmatic, or to be so like purist in terms of who we work with, to be like, yo, maybe they don't start off as socialists, but we could win them over to that eventually. So I think that really is the correct approach. Moving on to Cuba, because recently in November 15th, we saw it for weeks that the US media, they were like, November 15th, the Cuban people are going to rise up. They had a planned revolution, which is ironic because they always make fun of the left-wing socialist democracies like Venezuela and Nicaragua for claiming to already have the election result set in stone. But for many weeks, I saw this even in September, they were like, November 15th, the revolution is going to happen in Cuba, pro-democracy protests. The CIA and all these outfits were already promoting it hard. And it was a complete flop. I mean, I'm not going to lie, I was kind of nervous at first. I was following it to see what's going on the island. And based on what I saw, based on some of the reports that I was able to read through, it seems like it was a complete failure. So I think that was really interesting. So what I want to do is I want to play a clip. This is from NBC, Cubans brace for National Day of Protest. And we're going to get your reaction to it.
A sign of solidarity. A caravan of cars in Miami showing their support for Cubans just 90 miles away. As Cubans on the island gear up for mass protests today, demanding basic necessities and freedom. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken echoing his praise for the brave Cuban people showing the strength of their will. Just months after unprecedented anti-government protests swept the island in July, leaving hundreds imprisoned by the Cuban government. Yhamir Garcia, a playwright and leader behind today's protest, spoke to NBC from inside his home in Havana.
I think that we don't have democracy in Cuba.
This just hours before he says his home was surrounded by state agents on Sunday.
Está rodeado todo el edificio de agentes de la seguridad del Estado vestidos de civil.
It is a reality that Iris Mariño Garcia faced firsthand. She was jailed for 10 days following the July 11th protests and says she still won't give up.
¿Tienes miedo? Are you afraid?
Sí. Sí tengo miedo. En este brazo, mi brazo derecho, recibió hematomas, me dieron golpes, me arrastraron, me secuestraron. Claro que tengo que tener miedo, soy un ser humano, pero estoy en paz, porque sé que lo que estoy haciendo es justo. Mi conciencia está limpia, es justo para una Cuba plural, una Cuba democrática y libre. ¿Qué necesitamos?
This all comes on the same day that Cuba reopens its borders to tourists, after being closed for more than a year during the pandemic. That's why those marching today say now is the time for change, while the world is watching.
Que sea simplemente para amedrentar, porque esta vez el mundo está mirando y está mirando con antelación, ¿no?
Meanwhile, there are still nearly 700 estimated detainees from those July protests. In fact, those same sources you just saw me speaking to there in Cuba say they fear for their safety and their lives. Before our interview, they said their full name and location on camera just so people would know where to find them if they get taken away today. In fact, they're blowing up my phone right now, calling me this morning in hushed tones, one showing me videos of the agents standing outside their home just to prevent them from protesting today. So the situation is serious and getting even more grave.
So much courage that they're showing in speaking out. Bravery. Thank you.
Thanks. Such an important story.
So much courage, such an important story. It's fucking ridiculous, man. And it was a complete flop. It was something that it was really disgusting. It went nowhere, honestly. And I think they were really embarrassed because mainstream media was really hyping it up. Shout out to Comrade Erica, peace comrades, to ILL, stay fishing. Sanctions against Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua are crimes against humanity. And also, Ultraman Service says sanctions are war for economic terrorism. You give great communication of truth, comrades. You can read David Talbot's book, The Devil's Chessboard, as it outlines the deviant CIA history. And Comrade Erica said, I hope they never come out of their homes. For real. And these are people like, if you just do some very peripheral research into who these quote unquote democracy activists are, they're all on the payroll of the NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, USAID. And that's usually the angle that they use. They usually have people who seem creative, who seem talented, and paint them as being anti-government. So it's something that we have to be really careful about when we're analyzing the news. Before I get reaction, I do want to play a clip. This is shout out to Comrade Yhamir. This is him taking footage at a protest, solidarity protest in New York. And this was interesting because this is some footage that you're not going to see about people defending the Cuban Revolution. I believe this was two groups, one of the Gusanos and also people defending it. So I'm going to play this and then get your reaction.
¿Volverán los gusanos? No volverán. No volverán. No volverán. No volverán. No volverán. Cuba sin bloqueo, no. Cuba sin bloqueo, no. Cuba sin bloqueo, no. Cuba sin bloqueo, no. ¡Viva Che! ¡Que viva Cuba socialista! ¡Que viva! ¡Que viva!
Let Cuba live!
Let Cuba live!
End the blockade!
End the blockade! El pueblo unido
Jamás será vencido.
El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. El pueblo unido.
Comrade Yhamir always holding it down with the chants, the loudest one there. He's like, yo, I like how you hyped up the guy at the beginning. You're like, yo, will they ever return? He's like, fuck no, they're not going to return to Cuba. But Comrade Yhamir, your analysis, you've been pretty active in New York, especially with the Cuban Solidarity rallies. You've also been involved in helping to clean up the mural of Che Guevara and Juan Pedro Luis Campos in Spanish Harlem that the Gusanos have been defacing. They've been throwing paint on it already twice, I think. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your analysis of the failed, flopped, attempted coup in Cuba, and also maybe some of the work that you do in New York?
So yeah, I mean, this coup, well, this recent coup attempt in Cuba was very embarrassing for the Gusanos, and it was another triumph for the Cuban Revolution and the Cuban people. I mean, nobody, like the only people that went out in the streets were the youth that support the Cuban Revolution. And like I remember talking to people in the Cuban mission in New York City that they were telling me that the Gusanos, they couldn't find no like images of protesting. Like I remember people on social media were making jokes because people took the image of the president Miguel Díaz-Canel, him sitting down in Indian position with a bandana and a Che Guevara shirt. I mean, it was just embarrassing. They took that image and that's the president, you know, like, and it's horrible too because he's wearing a Che Guevara shirt. And what else? It was just it was powerful being in the streets over there in New York, bro. Like it's like we were more than them. Like like we say here in New York, we were like 150 deep, and them motherfuckers are like like 50, 60, and they had to bunch up together to make it seem that they were more. And you saw how like Univision and Telemundo were going on their side and making it seem like they were like more than us, and now we were more. And it was also interesting because like I was explaining this to the people in the Cuban mission, that everybody came from a different leftist group, a different leftist organization with a different ideology that, you know, people might try to get into arguments, like say that they're like a Maoist, a Stalinist, a Trotskyist, an anarchist, you know, all of it. But at the end of the day, everybody had a connection with Cuba. Everybody understood that they had to defend Cuba against imperialism, against these gusanos, and stand in solidarity, because Cuba has been in international solidarity with many different peoples of the world. So it was powerful to see that, and just like confronting these gusanos, I realized like none of them have like a sense of ideology. I remember some of them yelling out, Cuba for Cubans, Cuba for Cubans. And I'm laughing because they make it sound like Cuba is not full of Cubans. Like the island is populated with 11 million Cubanos. They're not being displaced out of their lands like the Palestinians, or the Puerto Ricans, in all due respect. But it's just like they like it showed also in another thing that they told us too, and it was funny too. They said that we're not Cubans. They started yelling at us que ustedes no son cubanos. Ustedes no son cubanos. I'm like, of course we're in the U.S. We're here to advocate for the lifting of the blockade and for our government not to invade Cuba. So it was just it was a victory all around for the people on the island of Cuba and also the Cuba solidarity activists.
Most
here in the U.S.
Most definitely. And why don't you also tell us a little bit about the mural for people who aren't familiar?
Okay. Yes, the mural. Thank you. So there's this mural of the Puerto Rican nationalist revolutionary Pedro Albizu Campos from the 50s, right next to El Comandante Che Guevara. It's known as the Dos Alas mural to demonstrate the brotherhood and sisterhood between Cuba and Puerto Rico. And it's on 3rd Avenue and 105th Street. And it's been vandalized twice by Cuban gusanos. Just to give a little bit of background of how this whole that's it right there. Just to give a little bit of background of like how this whole drama happened, is that there was this so-called artist named Athenia, that she's an Afro-Cuban. She's like half Cuban, half Dominican, but she's heavily involved with the SOS Cuba and New York and NYC. That you can follow them on Instagram. Like we usually have to follow them on Instagram to see what they're plotting, just to make sure that they're not getting any ideas to deface the mural. Let's see. Oh, Ramiro's looking them up right now at SOS Cuba in New York, I believe. But yeah, they have their marches. They be posting up, so we always have to be ready. So this, that's it right there. That's them right there. So there was this girl that she's an artist. She has her own nonprofit called Artists Making Changes, and she started the whole petition to get the mural defaced because she's from that community. Unfortunately, the sister is an African sister, but she's confused and she doesn't know what she's talking about, because she wants to come with these arguments that Che was a racist, that Che was homophobic, and that's why we need to cancel him. And we have to we always have to understand that, you know, Che, like many other revolutionary figures, are products of their time. And I mean, Che, you know, is a person that was a white Argentinian that sacrificed his middle class luxury as a white Argentinian in Argentina to go fight for black and brown poor people throughout the third world, whether it was in Cuba or in Africa or in Bolivia. And as far as like his homophobia, I mean, like I remember when I was in Cuba and I went to a coalition, like a LGBTQ coalition, and I spoke to a gay Cuban brother, that he told me that it's no secret that, you know, probably most of the revolutionaries that led the revolution had homophobic tendencies. But we're talking about the 1960s. We're talking about an era where gay rights wasn't as a strong of a movement like it is now. And also the fact that Fidel apologized for that, like decades later, you know, and had a lot of reconciliation with the LGBTQ community. So anyhow, that attack on the mural is also an attack on like an attack on the mural is an attack on the community of East Harlem, which is a traditionally young lords community. The young lords being a Boricua revolutionary movement from the 60s in New York City and Chicago, that they had their inspirations from the Black Panthers and the Cuban Revolution. So everybody was outraged, and also for the fact that the person who defaced the mural the first time, and it looked very violent, was basically this Cuban American Gusano from Miami, from Hialeah, that he goes by the name I forgot. This guy was a joke. This guy was a clown. Legacy. Yeah, I don't know, but I remember Instagram. He goes like Legacy got bars. That was his Instagram page. And the funny thing about this dude is that he comes off as like a Black Lives Matter activist, like an indigenous a water protector. He called himself a water protector, advocating for the liberation of Palestine, saying that he's a rapper, you know, wearing the shirts of Tupac. And the fact that, like, you know, how you wearing the shirt of Tupac and you're against the Cuban government, and the Cuban government has Assata Shakur, who's Tupac's godmother, like keeping her safe from the United States government. That all, like, toda vida, like still till today, they have her on the FBI's list as the woman on the top terrorist list as a woman. So he vandalized the mural and fucking fled out of New York when that happened. Because everybody was, people were ready to look for him. Like that shit was wild. I mean, you already know. I mean, Libre, you're Boricua, bro. So you already know. Like, I had a lot of Boricuas tell me, yo, the motherfucker would have like touched Albizu, we would have had them eating out of a toothpaste or something like that. But so we all came together. It was during a rally in July that paralleled to rallies in Puerto Rico for independence, and we all ended the rally. We went from the Bronx all the way to the People's Church in East Harlem, and it's a Young Lords Church, and then we went to the mural and we fixed up the mural, and that felt like a very a victorious moment. It felt like a very communal moment, because we made like, also, like, these gusanos did us a favor in a sense, because they made us understand the importance of this mural to the community, to the children of that community, so they understand who Albizu Campos was and who Che Guevara was. And I mean, recently, like this month, there was another like little attack, but I mean, we got together and we fixed it up again. And you know, they keep doing this. We'll keep going at it again, because there's a history that we have to defend in the diaspora of our heroes.
Beautifully said. It reminds me of that song by Victor Jara, Que lindo ser voluntario. How beautiful it is to be a volunteer, to clean up your community. And that's really what socialism is about. It's not about chaos and crisis. It's about peace and stability and protecting the culture of the community, especially in a neighborhood like El Barrio that has been subjected to so much police violence and poverty, that has so much revolutionary history in terms of even the Young Lords and the Boricua liberation movement in New York. So that's really beautiful to see. And I'm glad that you were able to be part of that. And I think it's something that is really cool. And it's interesting that you say that a lot of these gusanos have been trying to use language of the left, because something that we were talking about on the webinar on hybrid warfare against Nicaragua, and just in general, is the way in which the imperialists have used this strategy of attacking the left from the left, of using imagery, even the Patria y Vida, like putting a fist on it, you know, putting BLM, Patria y Vida, making it seem like a social justice movement. And it's a strategy that has really come about since the 70s and 80s, since the Congress for Cultural Freedom, a CIA program, look it up, that talks about defeating the quote-unquote Marxist-Leninist left with the democratic socialists or other forms of identity politics that are used. So it's just a really fascinating thing, that because we're seeing it play out as we speak, and I think it's something that we have to be very weary of, because they do the same thing as well with indigenous communities, the same way that they'll say, Africa, and of course, that's not to deny that there aren't any contradictions. There's still, if there is racism in Cuba, it's not because of the 60 plus years of revolution, it's because of the hundreds of years of colonialism and colonization and imperialism. It's not perfect, but the Afro-Cubans are part of the Cuban Revolution. They're the heart and soul of it. And the same thing in a country like Nicaragua or Bolivia with indigenous peoples, or of course there's contradictions, but you can't separate indigenous liberation from the Sandinista revolution. And it's something that we have to be really aware of. But Comrade Libre, your reaction to the failed coup in Cuba, the flop color revolution, and also maybe connecting it with anything that's going on in Borinquen as well.
Yeah, first of all, I'm happy that shit did not happen, because I was definitely, my heartbeat was beating, knowing that, again, like the U.S. will take the time to fund a counter revolution, right? That is helping people. They would rather do that than to offer the people of its own country, right, free education, right? We can't do that, but we can bail out the banks, right? We can't possibly offer free healthcare, right? Because we have over 800 military bases around the world, right? And so I think it's ironic that people are going to critique governments that are actually representing their people when the place that they're in, our government does not represent us. So why don't we resolve that contradiction, right? Again, we have an obligation to our comrades here, our indigenous comrades, right? Land back, right? Free the land by any means. Shout out to New Africans, right? And so I'm glad that it was not successful. At that same day, Alex Saab, we did an action for Alex Saab, right? Again, he's a Venezuelan diplomat. For people that do not know, he's a Venezuelan diplomat that was illegally extradited from Cape Verde. And so, right, like the U.S. is literally, it's just moving as if like there are no consequences to the things that it does. And that's horrible, right? Comrade Kwame Ture talks about, right, our obligation as revolutionaries here, right? Why are we not pushing our government, right? They're taking our tax dollars. Why are we not pushing our government, right? That's how we help people back in Africa. That's how we help our comrades in Latin America and the Caribbean, right? By holding our government accountable for the atrocities that have been committed. And so, and also it's like, there was just a screening, shout out to Belly the Beast. If folks are not familiar, check out The War on Cuba. Why? Because it's actual journalism. And they're talking with Cubans that live in Cuba, right, that are affected by the decisions. And they also offer, different views. They interview a journalist that was arrested on July 11th, right? And guess what he said? That he wasn't scared, right? So, the mass media is going to push propaganda, right, that fits into this narrative to justify the inhumane things that we do, right? In the same way that that Afghanistan in the 1970s had their socialist revolution, and instead we created Al-Qaeda. Instead of supporting the people of Afghanistan, right? And the fact that women were holding guns, right? And that they could choose to wear the hijab, right? Because that is an option, right? Now they have to deal with that contradiction with what currently exists. And it set the country back decades, right? And I think people don't understand that, right? When you ask for the US to intervene, they're going to fucking kill people and blow things up. That's not what we need, right? And that's why it's important, right? Like all these countries, even despite the US sanctions, they talk about peace. Why? Because peace is something that you struggle and you fight for. And now that they got it, they don't want to go back to what we have here in imperialism, right? Which is, 49 million Americans going hungry. What the fuck is that, right? Again, we really need to be addressing our principal contradiction of imperialism, right? And our international solidarity is to build with comrades, elsewhere, but it is also our obligation to our comrades here to fight for revolution here. And Cuba is something that we will defend, right? I wore my Che shirt. We did a guerrilla art performance at the Miami Book Fair, right? Asking to lift the blockade, but also to release Alex Saab. And when people saw my Che shirt, oh my God, you should have saw these gusanos, bro. This shit was hilarious. Like when I tell you they would not let me speak. It's like, you all talk about democracy and how you come to this country because there's freedom of speech. And then you are here attempting, right, to stop somebody from speaking, right? Oh, but this is democracy, right? So, and also these are individuals that would not dare go further north in Turtle Island and see what it's like and how they as immigrants would be treated, right? A lot of these gusanos, they fucking stay here their whole life. They don't know what it's like to live in the US. They know what it's like to live in Miami, right? And even watching the war on Cuba, right? A Cuban made a very good point, right? Miami Cubans do not represent the masses of Cubans, right? They made a decision to leave, right? Because their plantation owning grandparents supported Batista, right? So, a majority of Cubans, like Cuba's a black country, right? Let's just talk about it. And this is also why we have to be very careful with identity politics, right? Comrade Fidel Castro, El Comandante, said, right, we're not getting rid of racism. Now that we have communism, we're in a position to address the contradiction that racism had, understanding that it is a side effect of colonization, right? So they're in a revolutionary process. And we got to be scientific. Revolution is not about perfection. Revolution is about trial and error and doing better, right? And meeting the needs of the masses. And that is exactly what's happening in Cuba. That's what's happening in Venezuela. That's what's happening in Nicaragua, despite these sanctions, right? And they're still doing a lot better than the average American here on Turtle Island. Cuba, we're part of the Solidarity Committee with Cuba, with comrades in Cuba, St. Vincent, Jamaica, throughout the Caribbean. Shout out to Yhamir for connecting us, right? Cuba has always been in solidarity with the necessity for the liberation of the people of Borinquen, right? Today, people are out in the streets, and who's talking about it, right? They're talking about shutting down our public universities. Why is the mass media not focusing on the things that are happening over here, the problems that the U.S. is creating? We just privatized, like the people did not ask for this. The government, Pierre Luisi, like he's a vende patria, mata mama, as they say in Nicaragua. Luma, the CEO of Luma, just released documents showing that their annual income is over $1 million. The average income of someone in Borinquen is $20,000, right? And there have been the electricity has been shutting down more so than when it was a public company, right? So even this idea of improvement and development under imperialism is a sham, right? In Venezuela, they built communes. In the US, we have all these empty buildings that we're building. Here in Miami, right? A majority of these high-rises are empty, but we have a houseless population, right? We have more empty buildings than we have houseless people, which means we can house all these individuals, but we're going to criminalize poverty. Like, make it make sense. The idea that people can become capitalists, or when people try to justify, it's like, you're not a capitalist. You're not going to become a capitalist. You're just going to be used, and they're going to sell you this idea because a few people did it, that it's possible. It's not attainable. We have to destroy the contradiction of imperialism, and we have to move towards socialism. And that's the only way that we can be in relationship with land and in relationship to one another without exploiting our people. So you free them all, free the people, free the land.
It makes me think of that quote in Capital by Marx, where he says that capitalism is anarchy, the anarchy of production. Miami, you have all these empty high-rise condos that are literally collapsing into the sea. The infrastructure is decaying, and it just shows the irrationality of the free market. And in our socialist countries in Nuestra America, you have governments that put the people first and not profit. And I think it's something beautiful to see. And Comrade Khalil, your reaction to what's happened in Cuba and just overall lessons for the Cuban Revolution. Let me unmute you.
I'd like to say, yo, this chat is lit right now.
Yeah.
This chat is lit right now, so appreciate the chat. First, I'd like to say, on this Sunday, the elections in Honduras will be held. Libre will be trying to graph for the National Assembly. Tomorrow, we'll be translating a document we received from Libre in regards to their movement, so forth and so on. It will be published on Troika. I think the video highlights something, right? And I'm going to be using the Tricontinental Dossier 16, if that's the right number, but the name will be right, which is Venezuela and Hybrid Wars, right? We had our panel discussion on hybrid wars this Friday, which is increasing in Nicaragua, right? We're familiar with proxy wars and how that played out in the 70s and 80s in Central America. And it's still playing out in the Arab world, right? Afghanistan and so forth and so on. I think it's important to note that, right? The kind of strategy that the imperialists are going to be using, are going to be for the hearts and minds of not only the people of the said nation, but of the people of the world, right? The Vietnam War, right? A victory for the Vietnamese people, won not due to their military, right? But due to the commitment to their own struggle, right? And through that commitment, people around the world stood in solidarity, chanting for the end of war in Vietnam, right? So U.S. empire lost support. Since then, similarly, how they've always invested in propaganda domestically in regards to commercial products, they expanded into advertising for their wars, right? Winning the hearts and minds of people for these imperialist projects. I think this color revolution strategy is something you're going to see again in Cuba. And it's up to the Communist Party of Cuba, the leaders, both in the party and in the municipalities, which are separate, and just the everyday leaders of cadres, artists, musicians, workers, campesinos, will have to stand up against that through reality, fighting through it with their everyday struggle, which was what we have seen today in Cuba. People in Cuba are the ones who speak for themselves, and what they want to see is an end to their sanctions and embargoes, right? I would say, me personally, and I think everybody on this call would say Obama is not anywhere near towards everyone's favorite president. They stand on the same side as history as all other presidents against the liberation of Abya Yala, North America, Turtle Island, and the global emancipation of the exploitation of human by human. They're all enemies, right? But the perspective from the global South is that, he's pretty well received, right? He ended a lot of sanctions for Iran. He opened up free trade with Cuba in an attempt to do what they failed to do in China, which is to neoliberalize the economy and neoliberalize the politics. China is still communist and Cuba is still communist, right? But we have to understand that people have dreams and aspirations, and sanctions and embargoes affect everyday life. Those who call for a color revolution, I would say could either be doing two things. They could either be seeking interest to be the new neoliberal ruling class, which is most oftenly the case. That's why they get funding for it. Or they may actually believe their hearts and minds and their ideology is with the imperialists. It is with the bourgeoisie, which is an important question when it comes to solidarity actions within the metropole, right? If someone does not stand for having a revolution here on Turtle Island for the establishment of a worker state, I would say you couldn't be in solidarity with Cuba because you're abandoning what it means to be an internationalist, which is to create socialism where you are, right? A second point would be if you want to say free Palestine, right? So speaking on Brother Legacy, which we know personally here in Miami, working in the community, if you want to say free Palestine, you want to say Black liberation, Black nationalism, if you want to say all these things, then you are strongly confused if you choose to side for the overthrow of the Cuban People's Revolution. You may consider yourself, oh, I'm Cuban, and you may actually be of that descent. You may not even be a white Cuban, right? But at the end of the day, you're choosing the side of imperialism and you're abandoning the revolution here in America. You are an op, right? You can do all the NGO programs you want. You can give as much food as you want. You can do what you want to do. But at the end of the day, you're reducing yourself to a Band-Aid and to an ideological soldier for imperialism. And I'm done. I'll be releasing a paper called International Perspective on SOS Cuba, which I've been writing. That's why I've been kind of sourcing that throughout this discussion. That'll be dropping soon. I just got to get it approved by the committee because we socialists. Centralism.
Most definitely. That was beautifully said, Comrade Khalil. And I think it's something that is really important. Cuba, the first successful socialist revolution in Nuestra America. And it's important, as somebody mentioned earlier, Cuba has helped so many revolutionary movements throughout the decades in Nuestra America, all over the world. In the 60s and the 70s, Cuba supported indigenous communists in Guatemala, in Colombia, in Nicaragua, in El Salvador, in Chile, in Argentina, in Peru, in Venezuela. They helped the Borinquen Liberation Movement, the Palestinian, Vietnam, Africa, so many places I can't even list. And keep in mind, Cuba is a small nation. It's not huge. It's not the size of, let's say, Brazil or Argentina. It's pretty small with a small population. So to send many lives and bodies really goes to show you the beauty of internationalism, that international spirit of willing to fight for your sisters and brothers in another fellow oppressed country by imperialism. So it's so important to defend Cuba and Venezuela as well. Venezuela that has been at the forefront now, carrying the torch of internationalism. So many amazing conferences that are held in Venezuela about African internationalism, indigenous internationalism, about the importance of building socialist culture, and of course Nicaragua as well, continuing the Sandinista revolution. This Sunday is elections in Honduras. I'm hoping Xiomara Castro is able to get a victory. She was already denied twice a victory, Partido Libre. I was involved in Partido Libre when it first started, the FNRP, and twice she was denied her victory. I saw that everything happen. So I think at this point, the people of Honduras are at a point where they're just so ready to disrupt the right-wing evangelical fascist party that's in power and hopefully join ALBA, join the quote-unquote troika of tyranny, the troika of resistance, and become another member of that, just like Bolivia, just like Peru, and so many other nations. Chile as well. The people in Chile are also fighting to build socialism, resisting neoliberalism. So there's so much to look out for. I think this is a very exciting time, I think, for Latin America, because it's going to show that neoliberalism and capitalism has no future for our people. So I just wanted to really point out, shout out to everybody who's watching this scene. We're going to wrap up here because it's been really great talking to you, comrades. Again, this was episode 42, Unmasking Imperialism, exposing the mainstream media coverage of elections in Venezuela and Cuba, joined by comrades Yhamir, Comrade Khalil, and Comrade Libre. Make sure to subscribe to Yhamir's channel, the Bolivarian Flame. Link is in the description. He has other great videos from protests in New York City as well. Make sure to check those out. Also, please make sure to follow and subscribe to the Troika Kollective. Link is in the description. Amazing work that they're doing, and mad respect because they're in Miami. They're not in, like, I'm in LA, right? In LA, the Latino community, there's gusanos and shit. There was like a Contra Nicaragua rally here, but the overwhelming majority, especially the Chicano movement, most people tend to be on the left somewhere, even if they're anarchists, whatever. But to be in Miami, I think I have mad props for y'all, for actually doing that. So please make sure to go and support the Troika Collective. It was really dope speaking with you, comrades. I hope you have a great weekend. And we're gonna go out to some revolutionary music. One of my favorite artists, Ali Primera, Los que mueren por la vida. And this is a dedication to Comandante Hugo Chavez. Again, also want to honor Comandante Fidel Castro, who 5 years of his eternal passing, November 25th, and also the birthday of Presidente Nicolás Maduro. Peace out, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Ellos no serán bandera para abrazarnos con ella, y el que no la pueda alzar, que abandone la pelea. No es tiempo de recular ni de vivir de leyendas. Canta, canta, compañero, que tu voz sea disparo, que con las manos del pueblo no habrá canto desarmado. Canta, canta, compañero, canta, canta, compañero, canta, canta, compañero, que no calle tu canción. Si te falta bastimento, tienes ese corazón que tiene latir de bombo, color de vino ancestral. Viene tu cueca de lucha cabalgando un viento austral. Canta, canta, compañero, canta, canta, compañero. Canta, canta, compañero, que tu voz sea disparo, que con las manos del pueblo no habrá canto desarmado. Canta, canta, compañero, canta, canta, compañero, canta, canta, compañero, que no calle tu canción. Si te falta bastimento, tienes ese corazón que tiene latir de bombo, color de vino ancestral. Viene tu cueca de lucha jineteando un viento austral. Canta, canta, compañero, canta, canta, compañero. Los que mueren por la vida no pueden llamarse muertos. Canta, canta, compañero, canta, canta, compañero. Canta, canta, compañero, que no calle tu canción. Si te falta bastimento, tienes ese corazón. Canta, canta, compañero.